Opposing opposition, we have Sadiq and Jama.
Carrying one.
Without further ado, I now call upon other people. Give some courtesy here. Without further ado, I now call upon the Prime Minister to deliver.
In the wake of increasing crime rates and even harsher crimes, the only way to prevent more innocent citizens from becoming victims is through an earlier identification of their aggressor. We need to be able to not only intervene in these crimes, but prevent them from ever happening in order to make sure more people aren't subject to irreversible harms that, regardless of your systems, cannot change. So, what is this debate about from Opening Government? We think that we'd like this debate to center about the benefits that this machine could have. Therefore, we'd rather not argue on the feasibility. This means that it could work with high accuracy, and that's a pretense that we're going to go with. Secondly, what will this machine entail? We think that this does not mean we'll imprison them immediately once we identify them to be criminals. However, upon identification, we think we'll provide them the necessary support to curb any urgency or needs that they have to act on that. So if you're a kleptomaniac, we give you more support to make sure you don't steal things. But we also think that we monitor these individuals. So they may not rest well, but at least when we can constantly monitor them, we can prevent them from being able to act without us knowing. In extreme cases, however, if this person will definitely hurt society in a way that is really bad, we will have to imprison them because we have no other choice. And finally, only governments will know about this information, and we're not going to disclose his status to all of society. Before moving to my arguments, I'll take one from opening.
If these crimes are morally contentious, like sodomy or homosexuality, what are the kinds of support that you're going to give them? Are they going to be gay conversion therapy? Are they going to be these kinds of therapy?
Okay, so we recognize that there's a distinction between being a homosexual, which isn't a crime, and killing someone. So if we know he's a homosexual and there's no need to, because he's not going to hurt anyone for being a homosexual, so we won't impose this policy on him. First thing, why is this? How will this prevent crime? So the key principle from Team OG is someone is going to be a victim. Therefore, we need to protect victims at the expense of an aggressor. What happens when you have a victim? Victims are traumatized by your criminals because victims were alone when it happened. Victims were vulnerable. Therefore, people are exposed to harms such as rape. But another problem when people become victims are that irreversible harms that we cannot change regardless of whether this person goes to your jail and then rehabilitates. Then, when someone dies, we cannot bring him back, even if this person confesses, even if this person is sorry. However, we can if we stop him from acting. But the final thing is that we think when someone becomes a victim, it's an act against the community. So we don't really get to reel back from that, and it becomes much harder. These are terrible injustices to people, and we need to stop it from happening. No, thank you. Why do we prevent crimes? Firstly, we reduce the ability for these future criminals to act. So the reason why they can do it so easily now is they're often unnoticed. And this is why they have an ability to get away or premeditate crimes that we can't anticipate. This also then makes these criminals extremely unpredictable. So we can't tell which lady he's going to look at in the alleyway. We can't tell which house he's going to rob. Therefore, we can't anticipate or push police forces there when that time comes. So we don't have good reaction time. No, thank you. Monitoring these victims allows us to always keep him in check. So he won't go unnoticed and he won't be unpredictable because we remove those elements that he has that makes him a dangerous element to society. But the second reason why we can prevent crimes, no thank you, is we can implement more pressure onto him. People often claim to be victims. People often claim to say that the state failed us, therefore we had to go to crimes. So what we're going to propose is that if it's a state failure, then it's the state's responsibility to intervene in his situation and make sure we provide, we remove his justification and give him every incentive to change. So we give him the ability to recognize he's a criminal and then give him the support he needs to make sure he doesn't go down that path. We provide these guys with what they lack. We provide these guys with the ability to not be criminals. No, thank you. And finally, we think another reason why we can prevent crime is we can recognize crimes that would have happened. So we can increase protection for victims in terms of knowing who the target group is that could be hurt before these people are. Second question, why is this good for possible criminals? What causes a criminal to be? Firstly, we think criminals or these people have an extreme lack of support. Therefore, if they do feel that they have a tendency to be a future criminal, they're forced to go true to their tendencies alone. The same way how it's harmful to interpret a Quran on your own, especially if you're an extremist, is you usually interpret it wrongly. So when we leave these people with their tendencies alone, they're going to interpret it as that they have to act on it. Therefore, they have no other structure to prevent that from happening. But another reason what causes them to be, no thank you, is often there's a misunderstanding that they are at a fault and that they do need help. So criminals don't understand that they have a problem. This then means that there's a lack of effort to change themselves. If I'm a thief, I only think I'm a thief because I want more money, not because I actually have a problem that needs to be addressed by higher ups. So they don't see the necessity in going to that. An example is the insane think they're sane, criminals think they're not. Finally, what causes a criminal to be? That they have an opportunity to strike. And the opportunity to strike always provokes them and gives them more of an incentive to act on that opportunity. Compared to if you were always being monitored by a cop, you're not going to kill someone in front of the cop because you know there's not a lot of opportunity for success. No. Actually, yes, from closing.
So your context for this debate is that there are insufficient resources for police to be everywhere. There's insufficient rehabilitation. The outcome of this model that you want is to provide greater resources to solve these crimes. How is that coherent?
We just think that the response time that the police have to crime is not enough to prevent citizens from becoming victims. So if someone is being raped, we won't know why that's happening, and we can't simply arrive at the scene to kill the guy. What happens is a person is raped and they have to live with that. They have to live with that fact while your criminal just goes through your shoddy criminal justice system. Why do we properly curb criminals? One, we think we provide him constant support and help. So it has to be something that is sustaining and a long-term process. You can't just expect him to go through it for a few weeks and be better. We properly identify him to ensure efficiency before that. So he constantly is exposed to more help and more support. But second, we provide agency of criminals over their situation. We want them to accept themselves as victims and work their way up from that. That's why we see self-actualization happening a lot in prisons, because people come to terms with what they've done and only then can they ask for forgiveness from themselves. We want that to happen earlier before someone becomes a victim. But finally, an ability to go back into society as people. Once you know that you are at a disadvantage, once you know that you need to help yourself, you can go back as a person and not as a criminal. And this is something that you can't provide if these people come out labeled as convicts. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now I call upon the Leader of Opposition to present his case. Here.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to stand against Malaysia's best and brightest and most innocent of youths in this country, debating for the sons of liberty, defending liberty. Liberty not just in body, but in mind and in spirit as well. We are an opening opposition will posit two things to you. First, that a crime can only be considered a crime when malicious intent is coupled with an illegal act. Having a guilty conscience or having a propensity to commit a crime is not equal to committing a crime in the first place. But secondly, we can only judge dangers based on what is an imminent danger, not a propensity or a probability of danger. And we believe the state should only make decisions based on that, ladies and gentlemen. We will prove to you the slippery slope that the opening government and the government bench will take us through if it gives the state the unequivocal power to start incarcerating or attaching policemen to individuals if it can simply guess that you might commit a crime. This debate is about two things. First, whether it is justified for the state to profile citizens based on genetics, socioeconomic conditions, race, religion, background, etc. Secondly, whether it is fair for the state to intrude into an individual's consciousness and pretty much give an individual an identity of criminality, and whether that would be best to stop criminality in the long run. No, thank you. 2 points of rebuttal before that. First, on the idea of funding these research programs, which, yeah, we kind of have to accept that maybe they might turn out to be successful. First, it allows the state to use this as an excuse to not deal with root problems or root causes of these crimes in the first place. That means if the state can put money, and there must be an opportunity cost because the state doesn't have, only has finite resources. If the state can take money away from welfare programs, away from money to, for example, help women or help African Americans or Hispanics in disenfranchised communities and put it into your program to build this machine, then it is less likely that you can deal with these root causes in the first place. The state says, hey, we don't have to deal with that. We're already creating this machine. It is akin to setting up Guantanamo Bay and preventively detaining terrorists rather than dealing with the root cause of Islamic terror, which is the discrimination of Muslims and Islamophobia in Europe and America at the end of the day. On a second point of rebuttal, this whole idea that Sid brought, imminent harm to victims versus probability of crime. That was a logical leap in the argument because Sid did not compare the probability of the crime and the danger to the victim versus the imminent danger to myself when the state tells me I'm a criminal, attaches a policeman to me and watches every movement I make and everywhere I go and essentially like poses a CCTV on me for the rest of my life. The harm that I might face versus the slight probability I might steal something in the future. The fact that the police is watching me all the time. The fact I have to watch my movements and cater my movements based on what the state feels is correct. I can't even have sex anymore without the state watching me because they think I could be a rapist. All these harms were never juxtaposed by that. But secondly, we recognize, yes, we recognize that the world, like we cannot foresee every single disaster. Sometimes crimes happen to people who do not deserve those crimes to be done upon them. But we have to, again, balance this with how much this power the state has to define individuals and to hurt individuals and to watch everything an individual does. No, thank you. First, on the first point, elements of criminality. The right of the state to arrest or intrude onto its citizens stems from the social contract. An individual breaks a law, harms a third party, and legitimizes the state's actions to intrude onto them. But a crime must be coupled with an intention to commit that crime as well as an act to commit that crime. So first on the idea of the act, the guilty act, right? The act has not yet occurred. It is not guaranteed to occur. It's merely a propensity of this guilty act to occur. Now, what happens under your model is that not only does the state has the ability to define what are crimes, not only does it have a monopoly of information as to who will commit crimes, but now it can arbitrarily tell people, hey, you are going to be attached to a police officer because we think you're going to commit a crime. We do not support this. We do not support this the same way we do not support preventive detention or detention without trial. It is simply unjust because the state has every power in the world to detain anyone it wants based on any crime that the parliament is able to define, because essentially it can tell you that you have a propensity to commit a crime and therefore can do this. Secondly, on the idea of intention, right? Human beings are born with no criminal intent, but or very minimal criminal intent. So on a first level, you are prosecuting crimes of thought. Consciousness, ladies and gentlemen, is the final frontier that we have. Some people are born racist. Some people are just bigoted, but we can't do anything about it because it is your consciousness. It is your personality, ladies and gentlemen. Unless a racist goes out and commits hate speech, that's when the state has the ability to intrude and to take away your rights and to put you in prison. But if the state, ladies and gentlemen, now tells you you are actually going to be a criminal in the future, the state is essentially implicating the intention onto you, ladies and gentlemen. I might be born and I might not have any criminal intention, maybe a probability of criminal intention, but not criminal intention in itself. Once the state defines this and tells me, hey, you know what, you are more likely to become a rapist in the future because you have a high sex drive, then it's more likely that I myself would have implied, wow, I'm actually a criminal. The state is essentially essentializing my identity as an individual and basing all of its surveillance based on a probability that this might happen. So not only does this provide a slippery slope for the state to have all the powers in the world, but it also becomes complicit in abetting that crime in the future because it essentially tells you that you are actually a criminal. Closing.
So, will you sell guns to an ex-convict?
We don't want to sell guns to anyone. Second point, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about existential discrimination. Now, throughout history and the role of the state and the fact that the welfare state exists is to help people who are most disenfranchised, the lowest common denominators of a society, people who are born into poor families, people who are born into minority groups, for example, who face discrimination by the majority. So what does your model do? First, it essentializes people based on, I can't believe I'm saying this, the lottery of birth. You might be born into a poorer family, meaning you're more likely to end up in a gang because you're less likely to have a college education. You might be born African American or Hispanic and that's less likely to, for example, have a college education and more likely to end up in prison compared to a white Caucasian. You might be born into a Muslim family in America and more likely to turn out to be an extremist terrorist versus a well-functioning American. So what this essentially does is it allows the state to profile individuals. That means if a black kid is born, you are more likely to end up in prison or become a criminal compared to a white kid. If you're a Muslim kid, you're more likely to be discriminated, to not be like socially cohesive with other members of society. Therefore, we'll take you and put you somewhere else. We think that is completely harmful. That is not the role of the state. We're supposed to help these people, give them welfare, and help them not commit these crimes, rather than profiling them and essentially creating like racial profiles of people and segmenting people based on those things. But secondly, we would argue that you are essentially creating state-endorsed identity creation. Because when you're born, you should be free to be whoever you want. But the state essentially tells you that you are defined as a criminal, and the state defines you as a criminal. This stops you from pursuing happiness and pursuing your own identity. Because whatever it is, the first thought in your mind is that I am a criminal. So the ability for you to go to college, to marry, to have a good life is severely harmed because the state has created an identity for you, not necessarily one that you created yourself. This is completely this super state that the government wants is something we will never stand for. Stand for us, stand for liberty, stand for the sons of liberty.
Thank the leader of opposition. Now I call upon Deputy Prime Minister.
It might sound like we are the bad guys. We are the guys that are going to monitor you. They're going to keep track of you. But recognize you are the people that are going to wait for these would-be criminals to commit the crime. Then you send them to prison and you make sure their life is over from then on. We don't want that to happen. We are the side fighting for that criminal. We are fighting to keep you away from that life of crime. We're fighting to keep you away from the stigma and the path that lays before you. Recognize that we are on your side. You do nothing besides be complacent. 3 rebuttals. Number 1, let's get rid of the stupid POI asked in our Prime Minister's speech. Morally dubious crimes. Because apparently if you're advanced enough to research this machine, we're not advanced enough to realize that maybe gays have rights. This is not about politics. This is not about morally dubious crimes. This is about objective crimes, and the debate should be centered upon this. By the way, America has now legalized gay marriage. Keep up with the times. Second of all, question, what is a crime? They have a misunderstanding of what we're going to do to these people. They say that for a crime to exist, they must have an act and an intent. And we're sitting there nodding, yes, because they are not criminals. They are would-be criminals, and we prevent their intent and act from culminating. No, thank you. So recognize we are not branding them criminals immediately. We say that these people have a tendency, and we need to help you before the tendency culminates in a crime that we can charge you with. Some people might commit the crime anyway, but this debate is also about the intervention before the crime occurs, and you are not engaging with that. No, thank you. Third rebuttal, how about the root causes of crime? They say that, well, we are diverting efforts from combating poverty and Islamophobia. Well, we recognize that poverty and Islamophobia, all these things are causes of crime, but how about other things, psychological things? So, sociopaths, psychopaths, pedophiles, rapists, these are all tendencies and root causes of crimes that are not able to be dealt with in status quo because we don't have the tools to identify them. So if you believe, no thank you, that we should identify the root causes of crimes, these are causes of crimes that you need to acknowledge too. More so, how about the Islamists and terrorism or whatever? If we can identify they're going to commit a racially motivated crime or a religion-based crime, at least we can identify and have direct discourse with you. Right now, the problem is we don't know you have those ideas. We can't reason with you because we don't know who you are. But on the outside, it does work. No thank you. But fourth of all, this vague idea about the nature of criminal intent and how we, the government, are defining your identity. Not true. We're not defining your identity. This could be part of your identity. It's within your genetics. It's you're predisposed to being a sociopath, so on and so forth. We are the ones that give you the freedom to counter that tendency at an early age, to define your life so you can be who you want. You don't have to be the sociopath. You don't have to be the psychopath. You can be who you want. We are the ones who deal with these predispositions at an early age. I'll take closing.
If you agree that this state is undermanned, under-resourced, and is pressured to look anti-crime, why would they send able-bodied policemen to every single corner of the world in comparison to just imprisoning them, which is the convenient and cheapest option?
Well, sorry, imprisoning is the cheapest option. Please live in the real world. It is not the cheapest option. We want to prevent that from happening as much as possible. No, thank you. Let's talk about the substantive contribution from second speaker. We're going to go from the angle of how we can best help these would-be criminals, recognizing that a life of being stigmatized by society is no life at all. No, thank you. So let's be very clear with what are we going to do. The first thing we do is we identify tendencies and we assist an individual in overcoming it. This has been absolutely ignored by opening opposition. They've just gone off into a tangent of what the debate should be, not realizing the core issue. No, thank you. What is the status quo when it comes to this problem? Criminals have to cope with urges alone. Pedophiles and sexual offenders do not feel comfortable seeking support from society. They feel stigmatized by society when they come out. No, thank you. More so, they don't seek state assistance for 3 reasons. Number 1, this is the state that's going to punish you. I have no incentive to come to you and reveal my desires. But number 2, I feel as though I can cope with this urge myself. I feel as though I don't need your help. I can control my pedophilia, but sometimes I fail and that occurs, outcome is not good for me. But third of all, I can't identify the urge early enough to affect meaningful change on the urge. If I'm a 12-year-old developing certain tendencies as a psychopath, I don't know what's happening to me. You need to step in and help me. No, thank you. More so, certain psychological conditions prevent people from even coming out and seeking help. Sociopaths and psychopaths will never come to themselves to want to ask for help from the state. It is not within their psychological condition to seek out help. We have to go to them rather than they come to us. Same for the people who feel as though they should blow up the Twin Towers because they hate Western civilization. They're not going to come to you because they see you as the enemy, but we can come to you and reason with you so you don't have to be enemies. No, thank you. So the conclusion here is that we identify these tendencies early and we assist them so you do not have to live the life of the criminal. This goes on to the second thing we do. This is in the extreme circumstance where we cannot control your tendency, where we cannot correct you, where we cannot give you the life to be free, we monitor you. But this happens only in very extreme cases. So there is a trade-off that has to be made here. No, thank you. The trade-off is, yes, we sacrifice some of the individual's privacy, but this only happens in limited circumstances. But what are the benefits? Number 1, we can stage an intervention. When we notice you're about to commit a crime, we can prevent you from actually committing the crime. If you make a slip, we can help you from committing that crime to begin with. This has also, no thank you, an obvious benefit to the victim. The victim could have had the experience of being raped or molested or robbed, and all those things are prevented. But there's also a very clear benefit to the criminal, is that they don't have to be a criminal. In status quo, this is what we do. We say, we're not going to do anything to prevent the crime from happening. We don't do anything to assist a person with criminal tendencies before it culminates in a crime. But what do? We wait for them to commit the crime. We wait for them to commit the crime so we can brand them a criminal, brand them the scum of society, send them to an overcrowded prison where they get raped, where they get HIV. When you come out of the prison and your life is over, you mix with criminals, your regular network of friends is all gone. You come home to a broken family because you were in prison for 3-5 years. You never had a chance to work on the relationships with your family. You come out and there's nothing left for you. No one wants to offer you a job. No one wants to do anything from you. So if we have to sacrifice your privacy, if we have to monitor you, we will do it. Because the alternative is you being a criminal, you being stigmatized by society, and you suffering for the rest of your life. We will not wait for that to happen. We are here to protect you.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister. Now I call upon the Deputy Leader of
You want a timer? Take my iPhone. Take my iPhone. Go.
Sorry, Sid. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to talk about 3 things in my speech. Rebuttals will be integrated because Sons of Liberty are all about integration, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, we're going to talk about morally contentious crimes, despite the fact that they wanted to ignore that point, we're going to tell you how even if homosexuality is no longer a crime in United States, we don't know which government is doing this to begin with, but we think there are other morally contentious crimes such as pedophilia, such as sodomy, ladies and gentlemen, or even public protest if you have a rebellious DNA within you. We think these are problematic if the state codifies you, because a crime today may not be a crime tomorrow, and that changes these people. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how will these people be treated within society, because they say they want to reduce stigma. We say stigma will be worse under their proposal. Thirdly, their burden is to reduce crime within society. I'm going to tell you how they don't reduce crime. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, we think our side and the alternatives that we will provide will reduce crimes in this debate. But before that, let's look at a couple of clarification of the motion, ladies and gentlemen. The side of opening government presumes that they will invest in this research to create this machine, and they will find this machine. That is the presumption, and all the benefits stems from them finding this machine. This debate is not about the presumption that this machine exists. This debate is an investment into that machine. So there's a 50-50% chance that we might or might not find this machine. I will tell you, if we find the machine, what will happen. If we don't find the machine, what will happen. If we don't find the machine, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to spend decades and billions of taxpayers' money into the investment of this machine, like the NASA program, ladies and gentlemen. We think that within that 3 decades or 4 decades before we find that machine, these resources could have been put into increasing policing in areas of crime. We can put it into community policing, ladies and gentlemen. We can include more socio-economic policies that elevate poverty, which is the root cause of crime. So you said you want to reduce crime. By the time we get this machine, you're not reducing crime, because the resources that you could have used to reduce crime, you're using into something that is might or might not happen, ladies and gentlemen. But what if we do find this thing, ladies and gentlemen? We think it is problematic as well, because if we don't, if we don't find, people will still think that the government is inventing something to prevent us from committing crime or to profile us. During that period, we think people will live in a climate of fear that their government is going to profile them. That is also problematic, ladies and gentlemen. Now, let's look at if we find this technology. Firstly, morally contentious crime. What is a crime, ladies and gentlemen? A crime today may not be a crime tomorrow, but the consequences of your support system or your treatment to this person now will change that person's identity until the future. It's irreparable, ladies and gentlemen. That is why you are changing the nature of a person, and you're taking away the ability for them to be themselves. We think codified laws are also, there are laws that are so subjective. There are laws to prevent crimes that are motivated by actus reus and mens rea. But there are also laws to prevent crimes that are driven by your DNA, like sodomy, like rape, for example, your nature, ladies and gentlemen. The problem then is we fear that this nanny state will put these people into treatments that changes their identity, to make them straight, to make them change their sexuality, to make them a person that is not them, ladies and gentlemen. And that's problematic. And we think these kinds of treatments are terrible. If you hear about how the gay conversion therapy works, they beat up these people, ladies and gentlemen, and we think that harms this individual. Just imagine you are born and you're a child and the police is following you everywhere, ladies and gentlemen. How traumatizing that life is. You can't be a child. You lose your childhood. Before you do something, you're thinking about whether or not that could or could not be a criminal act. That is a traumatizing experience for a child to go through. And we think that that is something that we don't support. Secondly, how will these people be stigmatized? The opening government argued to you that if they have criminal tendency, they commit a crime, then they will become a criminal, and that will stigmatize them because they are an ex-convict. We think what happens under their side is worse, because this machine is going to track the DNA, the background that these people come from, ladies and gentlemen. We think that is problematic, because if majority of the people that have violent tendencies or have criminal tendencies, ladies and gentlemen, come from a group that is ethnic, for example, ethnic black or Hispanics, ladies and gentlemen,
We think that what happens to them when they interact within society is that you confirm the rhetoric of the bigots that most black people have criminal tendencies, or most black people are criminals, ladies and gentlemen. We think that is problematic because the way in which these people will be treated within society will be bad, and we think that's problematic. We think now it's better because it's vague. They may make those claims that black people have a higher tendency to commit crime, but we can't tell for sure. But with your record or with your DNA testing and genetic testing, ladies and gentlemen, we think that these people will be treated even worse. And that's problematic. They can't say these people won't be stigmatized, because when you go to receive support from the state, your friends know you go and receive support from the state. People talk about it. These things are visible, ladies and gentlemen, and not opaque. I'll take one, yes.
Don't you think that's better than these people acting upon the tendencies and confirming that black people actually commit this crime?
Okay.
Prevent them from doing that in the first place.
No, they won't commit this crime, because the tendency doesn't mean that they will commit that crime, ladies and gentlemen. That is the presumption that opening government is operating on. We think, ladies and gentlemen, lastly, this won't reduce crime, because what happens is, if indeed these people actually commit the crime, how they feel about committing that crime is, I am a criminal, therefore I committed a crime. I did something that I was born to do. When they don't know that they have criminal tendency, when they commit a crime, they feel remorse. They feel bad about it, ladies and gentlemen, rather than using their tendency as a defense to tell the state that I had criminal tendency, you know that, I committed a crime, therefore, okay lah, right? That is problematic as well. Okay, lastly, they won't reduce crime, ladies and gentlemen, because people that are screened and don't have criminal tendency may commit a crime as well. Because Lacan said that an individual and how he interacts with society is based on his imagination and how people tell him who he is. Yes, I may not have criminal tendency today, but I may be poor in the future that will force me to rob a bank, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a foolproof system. Not only people that have criminal tendencies commit crime, people who don't have criminal tendencies can develop criminal tendencies in the future, or may have the motivation to do something that may be illegal. For all of those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, vote for Sons of Liberty.
Thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Now I call upon the Member of Government.
Every single individual is assumed good of heart till proven guilty. This assumption has cost us millions of innocent lives and has weakened us as humanity and as individuals to move on with the evolution of law and crime. We think that the only way that individuals and lawyers and judges will effectively advocate and maximize the capacity of the justice system is we can directly and specifically target the potential criminals that are out there in our society, and this mission will allow us to do that. We don't understand why we need to wait and listen to arguments that are not contentious in this debate. So let's look at a few rebuttals that were brought up by side opening opposition. Firstly, Rafiq and Shafiq are okay with us stereotyping and racially profiling individuals that are part of a specific community, and okay with society and very rich white individuals telling them, oh, you're a criminal, you're going to grow up to be a criminal, but not okay with us coming up with a machine that will definitely tell you that this person may commit a crime. And those individuals may be rich white Americans that are continuously discriminating against individuals that are racially profiled by police officers and law enforcers. Sit down, all of you. We think that that system that we have and that structural change in the system that we give to societies around the world is much better than your paradigm where you assume that black guy is the one that stole that thing from the shop. Secondly, let's talk about how he told us that if there is no actus rea and there is no mens rea, even if there is mens rea and there is no actus rea, that is not considered a crime. Haven't you heard of strict liability, Rafiq? But more importantly, knowing that the harm may exist in this circumstance, especially when we can quantify and ascertain that this individual may be a potential criminal, that is already a good that we're doing to society, and is already a stick liability that this individual may not mix with certain other individuals. So he can't mix with other gang members. He can't be part of an organized crime group, because we know that this individual will now not be associated with these individuals, because the police will be having thorough background checks on these individuals and make sure that he does not slip into the life of organized crime and the life of crime in essence. Thirdly, the most interesting argument brought up by Shafiq, have a seat, Rafiq, it's a waste of an investment. What is a waste of an investment? Like, if everything is a waste of an investment, and if everything causes some amount of money, then we wouldn't have the aircon that you're enjoying right now. You wouldn't have the very table that you're enjoying now. People wouldn't have to see how interestingly you debate now, Shafiq, because now there wouldn't be an investment. Have a seat. So this investment, and this interesting investment, is one that the state has to take, and if we argue, should prioritize over any other investment, because other people will live better lives because they know who will commit a crime and who won't commit a crime. Secondly, fourthly, what did Shafiq interestingly tell us? He told us that criminals will have a harder time to do everything. In other words, he told us that criminals will find it hard to commit crimes. Good, because this means that criminals won't commit crimes, and this means they will think twice before doing anything. So what if some people live harder lives because other people who lose their families and lose their friends live harder lives than you will as a potential criminal? And especially since we give you a good backup system, given here the state will help you out as much as we can to make sure that you don't commit a crime. We don't see a problem with these individuals being identified as potential criminals. Have a seat. Fifthly, let's talk about the defense against state. Like, he told us that, if now the state knows that I may commit crime, and if I do commit a crime, the state will say, that they will tell the state that they didn't do anything to stop me from doing this crime. Like, this also can be part of the court process, like things like mitigating factors and things like defenses that makes it a better court process. Under your paradigm, you may not even have a court process because there is a long list of individuals that may have committed a crime. We allow and we give the state and the law the autonomy to shortlist that long list and make it a shorter list and make it an easier paradigm for us to identify who committed that crime at the end of the day. A shorter list and a longer list. Have a seat. Why is this an extension of current state measures and why we give people better lives? The first reason is the effectivity of the justice system. But before I move on, yes.
Poor people are more likely to commit crimes. African Americans and Hispanics are more disproportionately poor and under the poverty line. Are you okay with hundreds of police officers following millions of black kids all around America?
Yeah, we don't want that. That's you just explained status quo. We don't want status quo. We think that we should have a specifically targeted system where we only follow individuals that may commit crimes. These other individuals that may commit crimes, but the probability of that is much lesser than these individuals who our mission will specifically target. We don't want black kids to live lives where police officers follow their asses. We want these potential criminals who be followed by police officers because they are a threat to society. They must live better lives, and other people also must live better lives. No more Shafiq. First reason, why is the effectivity of the justice system important? The law lacks constructive substance in order to function in the most efficient way possible. What are we talking about? We're talking about information, we're talking about evidence, we're talking about the psyche of criminals, we're talking about a guilty mindset. All these things need to be proven in order for the individual to be put behind the bars. But how we do it in another circumstance is very hard. We have a lot of limitation, and the law forbids us from doing a lot of things. This machine will allow us to exactly quantify that this individual somehow was there in that potential crime area, and we can identify whether this individual was part of that crime or not. Under your paradigm, where there will be like a longer list of individuals that were maybe part of the crime, and you can't even prove whether they were guilty or not because you don't know what they were thinking. He maybe just wanted to buy a chewing gum, but we will tell you that he didn't go there to buy a chewing gum. Secondly, why is it an exclusive? Why is this only exclusive to the reactivity? Like something that OG already talked about, but we will extend on it. Like things that we already have in status quo. Things like not selling guns to ex-convicts in America, where Second Amendment right is given. Secondly, we're talking about like things like parole, where we have like severe background checks on individuals that are released on parole, and we have to make them come to a report to the police station every day. All these things remove privacy from them. All these things make sure that they live harder lives. But at the end of the day, it makes the law a more efficient institute, and a law the more efficient entity that protects and secures every single individual. Thirdly, things like house arrest for politicians that are very rich and just don't want to walk to prison. Fourthly, we think that criminology. Like criminology in essence is an entity or a substance that individuals who spend their lives to interpret and analyze to criminals to understand, right? So if their acts and intentions can be known beforehand and can be known specifically who will commit the crime and who will not, this machine, especially a technology that evolves criminology and makes it easier for lawyers, judges, and the justice system to act in an efficient way possible. So we implement this in our current existing system that identifies who may be a criminal, and how do we use this alongside with the other advancements of technology that we have. Like, for example, things like GPS, CCTV, all these things that allow us to allocate and know where the crime particularly happened and how we solve that particular crime. So it has to work hand in hand with the current technologies that exist. So if you're against investments, you're against whatever we already have in the status quo. We're very proud to propose.
The fundamental problem on the government bench is they assume they changed the status quo for the better without ever engaging how the status quo in fact came to pass. And that's precisely what I'm going to do in this speech. 3 things. First, I'm going to tell you the victims of crime are no more deserving of protection than those who commit crime in the first place. That is the underpinning principle they have never actually defended. Secondly, I'm going to talk to you about what causes crime. I'm going to talk to you explicitly about how they criminalize communities and the world that already happens and why they make it worse. Finally, I'm going to talk about scientific research and how governments can construct the outcomes of that research to reflect predisposed biases, some actual analysis of the topic, which has been lacking thus far. Let's talk about whose rights are more important. Because the underpinning presumption here is that we ought to protect victims of crime or potential victims over those who may commit crimes against them. In a world in which we accept that criminology is based on 2 things. First, your random birth lottery, e.g. you are born with a particular genetic predisposition, we do not believe that your random accident of birth is any more deserving of punishment than somebody's random accident of happening to be on the street and being the victim of crime. In a world in which both of those 2 things are random chance and every person has equal chance of becoming either one of those 2 sets of people, we think it is principally unjustified to preference, or more importantly, to punish one person who is the victim of biology and randomness at the expense of another person who is the victim of that same randomness. But let's move beyond that and accept for a second that it is not completely random. In a world in which your criminality is socially constructed, in a world in which everybody in the opening half of this debate accepts that African Americans and other minorities, those who are poor, etc., are more likely to commit crimes than those who are rich, those people were the victim of a crime that the state perpetrated against them in the past. Let's look at the United States. Let's talk about why African Americans commit crime. It's because for hundreds of years, the state committed crimes against those individuals. And that's precisely why white Americans, who we accept are often victims of crime by African Americans, are in fact no more deserving of the protection of that state, which has benefited those people systematically for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Let's accept for a second that therefore the people, demographically speaking, who are most likely to commit crime have been the victims of egregious violations of their fundamental rights that the state has perpetrated. The state owes an immense and undefinable obligation to those communities in a way that we think has been totally ignored by the government bench. But let's also engage with the demographics of those people who in fact are the victims of crime. Because what they presume in this debate is that those people are innocent of anything that would make them more likely to be targeted. We think that is nonsense. If you are a white farmer in South Africa and you become the victim of crime by a poor, disenfranchised black man, we reject that you are innocent. We reject that you are entitled to or deserving of state protection in a world in which you, as the victim of that crime, constructed the circumstances that created your victimhood by dispossessing people, by stealing their land, by probably supporting a system of apartheid that fundamentally targeted the people who now subsequently commit crimes against you. Their principle is absolutely shot in this debate in a world in which we accept there is no meaningful distinction between those 2 sets of people. In fact, we think that most people who commit crimes are more entitled to the protection of the state than those who in fact are the victim of crime. So therefore, there is absolutely no reason at the conclusion of this debate to presume that those who are in fact targeted, those who are murdered, those who are robbed from, are more deserving of protection than the people whose lives they ruin. Which moves me on to the next most important part of this debate. What is the actual outcome of their policy? What causes crime? Go ahead, Aaron.
You're essentially arguing that if you are raped, you deserve to be raped. But which is worse? Being monitored so you don't commit the crime, or committing the crime, being charged?
Okay, yeah, I get it. I'll deal with the second practical stuff in a second because you make their lives much worse. You don't get to hyperbolize by saying being the victim of rape is the worst thing that can happen. Being the victim of systematic slavery of a state for hundreds of years, living a life where every single day you are the target of racism, where it's difficult for you to get a job, to get an education, where you can't access basic fundamental rights, like being a human, is as bad as being a victim of rape, and that is insufficient analysis for you to do in this debate. Let's talk about crime, because all the way through the government bench, they accept that there is a degree of free will and a degree of chance. How do they do that? By telling us these people can choose to rehabilitate and choose to not become criminals if we facilitate that. So which side is more likely to facilitate the circumstances that would encourage somebody to not want to commit a crime? Is it them or is it us? This policy has been implemented. The policy of following people around, the policy of monitoring people and abrogating their rights, the policy of using additional force is exactly what the United States government has done in many high crime areas in the United States, like the Bronx, like Brooklyn. If you go there, this is the world that exists right now. What was the outcome of that thing? It was to ensure that not just the people who presumably had a predisposition that the people there care about, but every single African-American person in that community would become a criminal. Why? Because they are followed around all of the time, not explicitly, but because all those people see is the instruments of a state which they presume oppresses people like them. So the identity of African-Americans in the United States is now constructed as criminals. That's seen as what is required to be an African-American, not because you are genetically predisposed, not even because you would necessarily steal because you need to, but because your brothers are targeted by this state, because it is difficult for you to avoid defending those people. We think that that is the criminality that they create of people who would have never otherwise had a predisposition for crime or committed crimes in the first instance. And that's why their policy is ineffective, because being followed around every single second of every single day for the rest of your life, aside from just being more expensive than putting people in jail and therefore unlikely, is likely to create criminality amongst every single person in that group. Let's talk about the outcome of this scientific research. Let's be clear. The entirety of human history can show you that people in power get to define the outcomes of scientific research according to the biases that help them most. And that's why for hundreds of years, science told us African-American people were stupider. And that's the exact same science that they're going to use. That is, African-American people are more likely to be criminals, because you can construct the outcome of research by changing the parameters of that research in the first place. In a world in which we accept that governments are already unaccountable, a policy they make worse by saying this information will never be released. In a world in which we accept that under the status quo, the United States government and other governments around the world are structurally racist, and the people involved in actually funding this research and constructing this research are racist, irrespective of whether or not race or class is actually definitive of becoming a criminal. That's precisely what this research is going to say. That's precisely the outcome here. These people may never have been a criminal. They may not have a predisposition to be a criminal, but scientific research is far from objective. You can construct the outcomes you want in a world in which you as a government have failed African Americans. You don't have the right to punish them. We oppose.
Thank you, member of opposition. I will call upon the government to case on the government side.
I'm gonna break. There is a part of law that says that everybody is innocent and good of heart until proven guilty. And closing government have proven to you why that part of the law is a lie. We think coming up from closing opposition, they say that states have committed the most horrible of intentions and horrible of circumstances when they've institutionalized slavery and institutionalized discrimination of certain minority communities, which is pigeonholing the debate, but I'll prove to you why it's wrong later. We think it's a horrible incentive when states can stop taking the prerogative and when states do
not act on the intention of telling an individual that you may be a criminal and we want to facilitate you to be a better person. We think that's the worst crime a state could ever do toward this community. Let's deal with the entire op-ed. Firstly, on closing, she came up and told us 3 things. Firstly, is that the victims of crime who may be committed against should not be protected, and we should not target individuals who may committing. Firstly, we think there's a mischaracterization of what we are going to do. We are not going to put these individuals into prison. We're not going to put racist, homophobic cards against you when someone can detect your identity. We are simply sit down, going to monitor you and explain to you that you could be a criminal, and that when you are in circumstances where your moral ambiguity will come up, then we force you to take the most morally relevant decision. That is all we are doing, opposition. But secondly, she came up and told us that the lottery of birth is something important, and that you deserve that just because you have a certain distinction between somebody else, that you should not be targeted against. Mr. Speaker, the difference between other lotteries of birth and our side is that your lottery of birth in the extension of your gene and your tendencies will result in the harm of somebody else. That is the difference, and that is something we need to police against. We don't think there is something as simple as your sexuality or anything of that sort. Rather, we think it's the intention of you to harm somebody that we mitigate on our side of the house. But thirdly, the idea of how minorities are the more likely to commit crimes because they've been discriminated against for years. Mr. Speaker, this argument assumes that if you're a black person caught stealing now because you were a victim of poverty 100 years ago, that you should be mitigated for that crime. We don't think that that's the way justice works. We think that regardless of your situation and your outcome, if you have a tendency and an intention to act, then you are acting in the name of your own individual self. We don't think that you have to remove this policy just because of discrimination 100 years ago. So we don't think this makes sense. But secondly, the idea of who will facilitate circumstances to make them better. Because, Mr. Speaker, she came up here and talked to us about racial profiling. She said that the current policy of monitoring is bad, and we don't disagree. We think that it's horrible that you have to target criminality with racism. But how does closing government change that principle of the law? Because now it's not based on what white majority individuals think. It's based on scientific proof that says that while there are individuals within the black community in the Bronx who are in fact who have criminal tendencies, it could also be upstate New York individuals who have the very same criminal tendencies. So the distinction is, she never came up and contested to us how monitoring was bad. So she arguably agreed that monitoring is bad. It's just the carrying out the management of monitoring that is horrible, and closing government fixes that when we facilitate the idea of scientific evidence with your monitoring. That side is lying. But finally, on the idea of scientific research, and this is the fluffiest part of her speech. Sit down. When she comes up, tells to us that every core tenet of science that we've been learning through our entire life was facilitated by scientists who lie. Mr. Speaker, this is false. We think scientists have an incentive to keep to the truth, because if somebody in the future were to find out that their path of science was false, then they would obviously be discredited. And we think that's where the intention to keep the truth and integrity of science is within these scientists. Sit down. But let's assume all scientists are evil and want to propagate only lies. We think, however, our side is the closest side to tell you the truth on how crime and the nature of crime exists. Because Nimla came in speech and talked to you about evolving the way criminality and criminology is created, where we can actually detect how crime is built within an individual and the types of tendencies these individuals will portray. That is something your side can never get. It's exclusive to closing government. We change the way the law views you. But before I move on to opening and deal with them, of course, closing.
Okay, so your robot or machine has to simply account for both genetic predisposition and also the sociological causes of crime. Therefore, your robot will necessarily punish those who are more likely to commit crime, which is, right now, according to you, objectively African American and other minority groups. How do you change the instrumental bias that already exists?
I love how she's trying to trivialize something as simple as a malicious intent to a socio-economic background that you come from. If you have an intention to harm, to steal, to rob, and to rape, and that intention is born within you, then yes, you will be accounted for. We don't think it has anything to do with years of discrimination. Sit down. But firstly, let's talk to you about opening opposition's idea about reaffirming bigotry. Because its entire argument works on the premise that the machine will say that the individuals within the Bronx are the only individuals who
commit crimes. We don't think that's true. We think rather there's a current perception that exists when it comes to monitoring crime and so on and so forth. However, we think bigotry will happen with or without this policy. But the only benefit that is exclusive to closing government is that we can stop bigotry and say that crime is not created because of your race or because of your background. It's committed as you, as an individual. And this is important to recognize because this is where the law evolves, which is what we brought to you that Gemma never dealt with. Because we changed the way the law views an individual and the way crimes happen. Because she wants to come up here and argue about socioeconomic circumstances, we think mitigating factors come into play. If she wants to come up here and argue to you that this lottery of birth puts you in a situation that you cannot change, we think that courts should recognize that yes, mitigating factors do exist to limit your punishment, because courts do recognize that sometimes you are not in the capacity to be the full consenting individual to a crime. So we don't see any contention coming from her speech when it comes to this matter. Sit down. Opening, you had your chance. But secondly, let's talk the idea of treatment of individuals, because it's horrible that 12-year-old has to come into a moral decision-making process. Because under opening opposition, we shouldn't subject somebody to decide that maybe an act is wrong and we should not act on it. On opening opposition, they think it's horrible to make a moral decision because you have to think about whether something is good or bad, is wrong. Mr. Speaker, if we can tell these individuals that they should be taking these moral decisions, when without our policing and monitoring, they would make the decision. In fact, it's something that we get a benefit from, because without this policy, you would have these individuals come into morally ambiguous situations and make the wrong choice. But when they know that they're being monitored by states, and states are constantly telling them that they are going to be evil and that they have potential to be evil, that is when we force them to make the right decision, because everybody fears prosecution. So we don't think that this is any wrong treatment to deal with in the first place. Finally, the idea of instilling criminal image, we think it's false. We think it's a lie that telling somebody that they're a criminal is going to make them a criminal. We think it's false, Mr. Speaker, because the intention to kill is malicious. It's not something that can be pushed upon you. The intention to commit a crime is not something that years of discrimination is going to push down onto you, but it's you as an individual. And it's high time states and courts and the justice recognizes that you are not innocent until proven guilty, but you are born with the intention.
Opening opposition told you that the state will now have the independent authority to construct your identity. The critical extension which we gave, which was unresponded by that side, is that the construction of the identity is a self-fulfilling prophecy for criminality. The point in which you are monitored on a daily basis, the point in which a police officer lives outside of your house or you have that metal bracelet around your feet, you are less likely to have friends. Your previous friends would leave you. Society will stigmatize you. When you go to school, people will treat you as an outcast. The social support structure, which previously you seek solace upon in order for you to not commit a crime, because you realize that society is your friend and is a part of you, is gone. In that world, ladies and gentlemen, an individual who might have previously been slightly predisposed to a crime will definitely be a criminal. We do not want that world to exist. 4 questions in my speech. We are the 4 extensions which Gemma brought up. Firstly, on the self-fulfilling prophecy. They said that, guys, we will not push them in prison. It's only like monitoring. Let's look how monitoring actually works in the real world. It means there'll be a police accompanying you or metal bracelet around you, which is identifiable. It means that if you live within a racial minority enclave, i.e. the Bronx, the amount of police presence will quadruple. We do acknowledge under status quo is big, but in their world it means almost every single person who's a racial minority and poor will have a police officer there with them. That means you lose the support structure which you previously had. That means you're more likely to be desperate. You are to give up on your life, ladies and gentlemen, because the position of futility which you are in. In that world, ladies and gentlemen, you know will retaliate against society. One of the biggest disincentives for people to commit crimes is because we see each other as brothers and sisters and brothers in arms. In their world, ladies and gentlemen, I have more of an incentive to retaliate because society has given up on me. We think this is a massive harm because in their world, you create more criminals, ladies and gentlemen, in comparison to us. But there's a second level, and this is where they completely miss the nuance of Gemma's case. It's not only about people identified as predisposed criminals. You also radicalize non-identified actors. What does this mean? Look at the Bronx, right? Assuming that there are 50% of the population in the Bronx are your predisposed criminals. The other 50% aren't. But this other 50% will be fucking pissed off, the point in which my brothers outside my house will have police officers, CCTVs, which will also impact me as a non-identified criminal. Wherever I go, outside my school, outside my house, there'll be freaking police officers all around me. Look in Ferguson, ladies and gentlemen. Not all of them were harmed by police brutality, but because my brothers in arms were persecuted, I am radicalized. In your world, ladies and gentlemen, even individuals who are not predisposed to crimes are more likely to become anti-state and anti-establishment. We think that's significantly bad. You didn't engage with that. That's only the first extension. The second extension was about how research actually worked in the real world. He merely trivialized that argument by saying, no. Scientists want to tell the truth. If not, they'll be decried in the future. How does research actually work in the real world? It's not based in the hands of the scientists. Instead, it is a construction of the state. The state is one who sets the guidelines as to what scientists can actually look into, ladies and gentlemen. This is the very same state which is guilty of racialized police brutality, and the very same state which should be in charge in setting the framework of how the robots will actually work, ladies and gentlemen. It is a government construction, not a scientist construction. In that world, ladies and gentlemen, it is self-evident that the racialized government, which has a legacy of discrimination, would want an inevitable truth which works in their advantage to discrimination and racism. That is the real extension. Unfortunately, he trivialized it only. No. Second extension. Now is the third extension. In my POI, I asked, how would the state respond to it, right? They asserted, guys, we're not going to throw them all in prison. We'll monitor them, we'll assist them. How will this actually work in the real world? Two responses here. Firstly, it won't work because imprisoning people, believe it or not, is the cheaper and most convenient option. His only response was, no, prison is very expensive. What is the comparative? Where every single person must be monitored, there'll be a police officer tied to every single person. You need to increase monitoring, send in for psychotherapy and psychoanalysis almost on a daily basis for every single identified person. That is inevitably more expensive in comparison to sending them to prison. But secondly, in my PO, I didn't say only about money, right? At times, politicians, that's why in the States, people will send a lot of people to prison, even if it's fucking costly. Because politicians and judges are pressured to be seen as anti-criminal and anti-crime. The point in which you equip them with a robot to say, why are you not incriminating this person? Why are you not imprisoning this person? That means that politician and judge is forced to send them to prison. Again, missed my POI, only want to engage in the money part without acknowledging that freaking politicians would spend like what's happening in the United States. That means the first option is to imprison them, ladies and gentlemen. But even if it is about monitoring, our two previous extensions will stand. Opening.
If you were really looking out for the black or brown man, wouldn't you assist him by making sure he does not commit a crime?
Unfortunately, as I explained in my first extension, they are more predisposed to commit the crime because the self-fulfilling criminality which you make, the point you make him desperate, the point you should strip him away of his social support structure, the point the state labels him and stigmatizes him as a criminal, he's more likely to become that criminal because you said that he will. Finally, let's look at the principle of criminality. And this is an argument again, which was ill responded to by that side. We told you that the state is a complicit in a historical injustice which underpins criminality. His only response was to say, but guys, your current action is not reflective of past injustices committed by the state. Are you freaking kidding me? If your parents' money and inheritance was stripped away from you, you are forced into a life of poverty, you are poor nowhere else to go and desperate, and you're freaking pissed off at the oppressors against you, you are more likely to lash out. There is a clear correlation. We think that's why it does matter. But what's the principle here? It means that the state is preemptively punishing individuals because of its past historical failures when the state is the complicit in that failure itself. What is the end goal of this debate? We do acknowledge that punishing people for crimes is critical, but preemptively doing it when the state is very racialized and bigoted to extent makes things worse. But worse when you discriminate these people to the point that you push them to a point of desperation to discriminate more. We have never been prouder to oppose this motion.
Both parties to debate, cross applause, shake hands, chill.
Oh, sorry.